The word life didn't echo. It didn't need to. It landed heavy, like a door slamming shut somewhere Marcus Reed couldn't see. For half a second, the courtroom forgot how to breathe. Marcus stood still, hands cuffed in front of him, the cold metal biting into wrists that were still thin, still young. 17 years old, 6 feet tall, brown skin that somehow felt darker under the fluorescent lights, like the room itself was staring. Life, the judge repeated, slower this time. Without the possibility of parole. A chair creaked. Someone in the gallery let out a quiet gasp, quickly swallowed. The bailiff shifted his weight. Even the prosecutor blinked, just once, like he hadn't expected the word to sound so final out loud. Marcus didn't cry. He didn't scream. He didn't fall apart the way movies said he should. Instead, his eyes drifted. Not to the judge, not to the jury, not even to his mother sitting 3 rows back with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone pale, but to the far wall. Beige. Cracked paint near the baseboard. A stain shaped vaguely like a bird. Life, he thought. So this is how it ends. The judge, Harold Whitman, adjusted his glasses and looked down from the bench. His face carried the practiced gravity of a man who had said this word before, maybe even enjoyed the authority of it. 72 years old, white hair, reputation for being tough on crime. Especially this kind of crime. "Mr. Reed," Whitman said, voice measured, "your actions showed a complete disregard for human life. The court finds no mitigating factors sufficient to outweigh the severity of your offense." Marcus swallowed. He wanted to say something. Anything. That he hadn't fired the gun. That he had run when things got out of control. That the older boys had laughed when he hesitated. That fear had been louder than reason. But the courtroom wasn't built for explanations, like his. It was built for conclusions. Behind him, his mother finally broke. A soft sound escaped her throat. Half prayer, half grief. Marcus didn't turn. If he did, he knew he wouldn't be able to stand anymore. The bailiff stepped closer, hand hovering near Marcus's elbow, already treating him like a man who belonged. To concrete walls and locked doors, Judge Whitman lifted his gavel. Court is adjourned. The wood struck once. That was it. Or at least that's what everyone thought. 2 years earlier, Marcus Reed had been invisible. Not in the poetic way, in the way that mattered. He lived on the south side of Baltimore, in a neighborhood people drove around, not through. Brick row houses leaned tiredly against each other like old men sharing secrets. Sirens were background noise. Helicopters passed. So often Marcus could tell time by them. He went to Lincoln High, underfunded, overcrowded, metal detectors at every entrance. Teachers rotated in and out like temporary guests. The good ones burned out fast. Marcus wasn't a troublemaker. That was the cruelest part. He kept his head down, hood up, backpack straps worn thin from being pulled too tight. He liked math because numbers made sense. He liked basketball because on the court, nobody cared where you were from if you could move fast and shoot clean. He liked silence best of all. At home, silence meant safety. His mother, Denise Reed, worked double shifts at a nursing home. She came home smelling like disinfectant and exhaustion. Some nights she talked. Some nights she just sat at the small kitchen table, staring at nothing. Marcus learned early not to ask for things, but the world asked things of him anyway. The first time he realized how differently he was seen happened in a grocery store. He was 14. He had walked in wearing his school hoodie, headphones in, list on his phone, milk, bread, eggs, normal things. Halfway down the aisle, he noticed the security guard trailing him. Not subtle, not embarrassed. Just close enough to make sure Marcus noticed. Every turn Marcus made, the guard made too. Marcus slowed. The guard slowed. Marcus stopped to check his phone. The guard stopped, pretending to study a shelf that clearly held nothing of interest. Marcus felt his face burn. Don't react, he told himself. Don't give him a reason. At checkout, the cashier smiled politely at the woman in front of him, then went blank when Marcus stepped up. "Receipt in the bag," she said flatly. Before he even paid, the security guard stood behind him until Marcus walked out. Outside, Marcus stood in the parking lot for a moment, groceries heavy in his hands, chest tighter than it should have been. He hadn't stolen anything, but he had. Been treated like he already had. That feeling, the quiet accusation, followed him everywhere after that. By 16, Marcus understood the rules. Don't run, don't argue, don't talk back, hands visible, eyes down, especially around police, the yuckas. Night, everything changed, started like any other. Humid air, streetlights buzzing, summer pressing in from all sides. Marcus had been at the park with some older guys he knew from the block. He didn't trust them, but he didn't have many choices either. They were laughing too loud, drinking, showing off a gun like it was a toy. Marcus felt the familiar knot in his stomach. "This is stupid," he said quietly. One of them laughed. "Relax, college boy." Then the sirens came, shouting, running, chaos unfolding faster than thought. Marcus ran. Behind him, a gun went off. Just one shot. That was all it took. From the moment Marcus was arrested, the narrative was set. The police report described him as uncooperative. The news described him as a local teen with suspected gang ties. The prosecutor described him as a willing participant. No one described him as scared. No one described him as a kid. During interrogation, the detective leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "You fit the profile," he said casually. Marcus frowned. "What profile?" The detective smiled like he had just proven a point. "You know, Marcus asked for a lawyer." The detective sighed, disappointed. "Thought we could do this the easy way." At trial, Marcus sat at the defense table in a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit. The jury looked at him like a problem they needed to solve quickly. The prosecution spoke with confidence. Words like dangerous, predatory, example floated through. The courtroom. The defense tried. They really did. But their budget was thin, their time limited. Objections were overruled. Evidence Marcus had never touched was laid out as if it were fate itself. Judge Whitman watched it all with an unreadable expression. When Marcus took the stand, his voice shook just enough to be noticed. "I didn't shoot anyone," he said. "I ran," the prosecutor smiled sympathetically. "So you admit you were there?" Marcus hesitated. That hesitation was later described as guilt. The verdict came fast. Guilty, and now, life. Back in the present, the bailiff finally touched Marcus's arm. "Let's go." Marcus nodded. As they turned toward the side door, something inside him settled. Not peace, but clarity. A strange calm that came when there was nothing left to lose. They paused near a small wooden table where his personal items had been placed. A wallet, a folded piece of paper, and an old flip phone. The kind with scratched plastic and a battery that barely held charge. The bailiff hesitated. "You got 1 minute?" Marcus looked up, surprised. The bailiff avoided his eyes. "One call." Marcus picked up the phone. His hands were steady now. He dialed from memory. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, low, controlled, unmistakably calm. "Marcus?" the man said. Marcus swallowed. "They said life," he replied quietly. There was a pause on the line. Not shock, not panic, just silence. Then the man spoke again, his voice sharpening like steel being drawn from its sheath. "Stay right where you are," he said. "Do not let them move you." Marcus looked up as Judge Whitman was rising from the bench. Too late. The courtroom doors were still open, and something had just changed. The bailiff frowned at Marcus's phone. "Time's up," he said, reaching out. Marcus didn't move. "I was told to stay," Marcus said quietly. The bailiff paused. "Told by who?" Marcus looked at him for the first time. "My father." Something in his tone, calm, certain, made the bailiff hesitate longer than procedure allowed. Judge Whitman had already stepped down from the bench, robe shifting as he turned to speak with the clerk. "Move him," the judge said without looking back. "Yes, Your Honor," the bailiff replied, finally taking Marcus by the arm. As they walked, Marcus felt it again, that familiar pressure. Eyes on him, not sympathy, not curiosity, judgment. They led him into a narrow holding corridor just outside the courtroom. The heavy door shut behind them with a hollow thud. The sound echoed longer than it should have. Marcus exhaled slowly. "Stay right where you are," his father had said. Marcus had no idea what that meant, but he obeyed. The first time Marcus understood. What authority abuse really looked like wasn't in a courtroom, it was in the back of a police car. After his arrest, they hadn't read him his rights right away. They hadn't needed to. They already believed they knew who he was. One officer sat in the front passenger seat, turned halfway around, studying Marcus through the metal cage. "You kids think you're untouchable," the officer said. "Running around like animals." Marcus stared at the floor. "Quiet now?" the officer scoffed. "Should have been quiet earlier." Marcus clenched his jaw. The officer leaned closer. "Say something." Marcus stayed silent. The officer smiled. "That's what I thought." Later, Marcus would realize the trick. They didn't want answers. They wanted reactions. In the corridor outside the courtroom, the bailiff shifted impatiently. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "This isn't how it works. Sentence is done. You're going back." Marcus nodded. "I understand." "Then move." Marcus didn't. Behind the closed door, voices rose. Lawyers, clerks, the scraping of chairs. Life continued, indifferent to him, until it didn't. A court clerk stepped into the hallway, whispering urgently to Judge Whitman, who had just emerged from his chambers. The judge's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. His eyebrows pulled together slightly. "What do you mean on the line?" Whitman asked. The clerk swallowed. "Sir, they said it's urgent, federal." Whitman scoffed. "Everyone thinks they're federal." "They used your full name," the clerk replied, "including your middle initial." Whitman stopped walking. In the corridor. Marcus watched this from a distance, heart pounding but face still. The bailiff noticed too. "What's going on?" he muttered. Judge Whitman turned sharply. "Why is the defendant still here?" Your Honor, he was." "Get him moving," Whitman snapped. "Now!" Before the bailiff could comply, another voice cut through. The air. "Judge Whitman?" A man in a dark suit stood at the end of the hallway, holding a phone out in front of him like it weighed something. "This call is for you," the man said. "From Washington." The hallway went quiet. Judge Whitman stared at the phone. "I'm busy," he said stiffly. The man didn't lower it. "Sir, they were very specific." Whitman hesitated. Then he took the phone. Marcus didn't hear the words, but he saw the reaction. Judge Whitman's face drained of color, not pale, but tight, controlled. The way a man looks when the ground beneath him shifts, but he refuses to stumble. "Yes," Whitman said into the phone. "This is Judge Harold Whitman." Pause. "Yes." Another pause. Longer. "I see," Whitman said finally. He glanced toward Marcus. Just once. Earlier that morning, before court, Marcus had stood in a holding cell with 3 other men. Older, louder, already hardened. One of them laughed when Marcus said he was 17. "They don't care," the man had said. "Soon as they put that word on you, you ain't a kid no more." "What word?" Marcus asked. The man smiled. Life. Now, hearing it again in his head, Marcus felt the weight shift slightly, still heavy, still terrifying, but unsettled. Thasiuai, bailiff's grip loosened. Judge Whitman handed the phone back without a word and turned to the clerk. "Clear the courtroom," he said quietly. "I need counsel present. Immediately." The clerk blinked. "Sir?" "Now." The clerk hurried. "Off." The bailiff stared. "Your Honor." "What about—" "Remove the cuffs," Whitman said. The hallway froze. The bailiff looked at Marcus, then back at the judge. "Sir?" "Remove them," Whitman repeated. "This instant." Marcus felt the metal release from his wrists. The weight lifted. Not freedom, but possibility. The courtroom emptied faster than Marcus had ever seen it. Jurors whispered. Spectators leaned in, trying to catch pieces of something they didn't understand. His mother stood, confused, eyes searching for him. When she saw his hands free, her breath caught. "What's happening?" she mouthed. Marcus shook his head slightly. "I don't know." Judge Whitman returned to the bench, posture stiff, jaw set. "This court is temporarily in recess," he announced. "No one is to leave the building." Murmurs erupted. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, with all due respect—" "Sit down," Whitman snapped. The prosecutor sat. Marcus felt eyes burn into him from every direction now. Not judgment, but curiosity edged with resentment. What makes him special? That question had followed Marcus his whole life, even when the answer was always nothing. Now, suddenly, it felt dangerous. 2 rows back, a man Marcus didn't recognize leaned toward another spectator. "Probably some stunt," the man whispered. "They always try something." A woman shook her head. "No judge does this for no reason." Racism didn't always shout. Sometimes it whispered explanations that made injustice feel normal. Marcus felt his chest tighten. "Don't hope," he warned himself. Hope was expensive. Hope hurt. In a private chamber behind the bench, Judge Whitman stood, with the prosecutor and a defense attorney who looked like he'd been pulled from another case mid-sentence. "This is irregular," the prosecutor said. "We have a verdict." "And we have a problem," Whitman replied. "A significant one." "What problem?" the prosecutor demanded. Whitman exhaled slowly. "That boy's father just contacted my office." "So?" the prosecutor scoffed. "Everyone calls." "This call," Whitman said carefully, "came through channels that don't call unless they have to." Silence. The defense attorney frowned. "Who is his father?" Whitman didn't answer right away. He looked at the closed door. Then he said, "I've been asked to pause enforcement of the sentence." The prosecutor's eyes widened. "By who?" Whitman finally met his gaze. "The U.S. Department of Justice." Back in the courtroom, Marcus sat alone at the defense table. For the first time all day, no one told him where to stand or when to move. He flexed his wrists, red marks still visible. "Stay right where you are," his father had said. Marcus closed, his eyes briefly. Memories rose uninvited, his father's voice on the phone late at night. Short calls, careful words, always calm, always distant. "I'm proud of you. Stay out of trouble. Focus on school." Marcus had never asked what his father did. Some part of him had known the answer mattered. Now, every second stretched thinner. The courtroom doors opened again. Judge Whitman returned. Everyone stood. Whitman didn't sit. He looked directly at Marcus Reed. And for the first time since this case began, he didn't look certain. "Mr. Reed," the judge said, voice measured but altered, "this court has received information that requires review." The room held its breath. "I am ordering an immediate pause on your transfer to state custody." Gasps. The prosecutor stood abruptly. "Your Honor!" Whitman raised a hand. "Sit down." The sound of authority had shifted. Marcus's knees felt weak. Not relief, suspense. Judge Whitman continued, "Until further notice, this court will reconvene pending federal inquiry." Federal. The word rippled through the room. Marcus's mother covered her mouth. Marcus's heart thundered. Then Judge Whitman added, quietly but unmistakably, "And Mr. Reed, your father will be arriving shortly." The courtroom erupted. Marcus didn't move, didn't smile, didn't speak, because whatever was coming next, he knew it would change everything. Marcus had never felt time stretch like it did in that courtroom. Minutes turned thick, heavy. Every second seemed to drag a question behind it. Who is his father? Why does Washington care? What did the judge hear on that phone? Marcus sat perfectly, still, hands folded on the table, the ghost of the cuffs still burning around his wrists. The courtroom buzzed with whispers that tried to pretend they weren't whispers at all. "This isn't right," someone muttered from the gallery. "Probably some political nonsense," another voice replied. Marcus heard it all. He always did. Growing up, he had learned that silence didn't protect you from being talked about. It just meant people felt safer saying things out loud. When he was 9, Marcus learned that lesson in school. His class had taken a field trip to the state science center. He had been excited. First time on a bus that wasn't headed home or to basketball practice. He had brought his lunch in a brown paper bag, folded neatly, his name written in marker. During the trip, a glass display case shattered in one of the exhibits. No one saw who did it. The teacher turned slowly. Her eyes landed on Marcus. "Marcus," she said calmly. "Step forward." He froze. "I didn't—" "We'll talk about it later," she said, already signaling to another adult. A white boy near the back snickered. Marcus spent the rest of the trip sitting alone on a bench while the others explored. At the end of the day, the security footage showed the truth. Another student had tripped and fallen into the case. The teacher apologized quietly. Not to the class, just to him. And even then, her voice carried a tone that said, "You understand why I thought it. Was you?" In the courtroom, Marcus's lawyer leaned in slightly. "You okay?" he whispered. Marcus nodded. He wasn't lying. He wasn't okay. But he had learned how to survive inside that space. The space where you didn't react, where you absorbed, where you waited. Across the aisle, the prosecutor tapped his pen against his legal pad, faster now. His jaw was tight, lips pressed thin. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. The system liked predictability. It liked boxes. It liked young black men who fit neatly into its narratives. Marcus could feel the shift, not just in procedure, but in attitude. He was no longer just defendant. He was a problem. While they waited, Marcus's mind drifted to his father. He hadn't seen him in person in years. Not because his father didn't care, but because his presence had always come in pieces. Phone calls from unfamiliar numbers. Short visits that felt more like check-ins than family time. No photos, no social media. No stories about work. When Marcus was 12, he had finally asked, "What do you do?" Marcus had said over the phone. There had been a pause. Then his father replied, "I work in law." Marcus had laughed. Like a lawyer? His father had smiled. Marcus could hear it. Something like that. That had been the end of it. The door at the back of the courtroom opened again. 2 men entered first, both in dark suits, both scanning the room with practiced awareness. They didn't look like security. They looked like certainty. Then the man between them stepped inside, tall, broad shoulders, calm presence. His hair was cut close, touched with gray at the temples. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. The room felt him before it understood him. Marcus's breath caught. He recognized the walk, recognized the stillness. His father's eyes found his immediately. And in that moment, before titles, before authority, before the weight of what this man represented, there was only a look that said, "I'm here." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. "Who is that? Is that—" No way. Judge Whitman stood. So did everyone else. The man approached the bench, removing his jacket and folding it neatly over his arm, not because he was required to, but because he chose to. "Your Honor," the man said, voice steady, respectful. "David Reed." Judge Whitman swallowed. "Yes," Whitman replied. "Mr. Reed. Not son, not defendant's father, just Mr. Reed." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. This wasn't a coincidence. This was recognition. David Reed turned finally to look at his son fully. Marcus stood. They didn't hug. They didn't speak. But David's gaze moved over Marcus carefully, checking for injuries, for fear, for anything broken that shouldn't have been. Marcus straightened unconsciously. He didn't want his father to see him small. When David spoke again, it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I'm here in my capacity as a representative of the United States Department of Justice," he said. The room inhaled, and as Marcus Reed's father. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't heavy, it was sharp. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, this is highly inappropriate." David turned slightly, just enough. "Sit down," he said calmly. The prosecutor froze. Then, slowly, he sat. Judge Whitman cleared his throat. "Mr. Reed, you are the U.S. Attorney General," David said, finishing the sentence without arrogance. "Yes." Gasps, whispers. Someone dropped a pen. Marcus's knees almost gave out. Not because of the title, but because of what it meant. All those nights, all those silences, all that distance. Protection hadn't been absence. It had been restraint. David continued, "I did not intervene during the investigation. I did not influence the jury. I did not request special treatment." He looked directly at the judge. "But I will not ignore a miscarriage of justice." The prosecutor stood again, voice rising. "This is emotional bias. The defendant's race, his family." David's eyes hardened. Not angry, but precise. "You charged a 17-year-old with felony murder," he said, "based on proximity, not action. You argued intent without evidence, and you ignored mitigating factors this court would consider standard if the defendant looked different." The words hung in the air. Uncomfortable. Undeniable. Marcus felt heat rise behind his eyes. Memories flooded in. The security guard, the teacher, the detective, the way the jury never looked at him as a child. This wasn't just about him. It never had been. Judge Whitman shifted. "Mr. Reed, what are you requesting?" David didn't hesitate. "I'm requesting this court vacate the sentence pending federal civil rights review," he said. "Effective immediately." The courtroom erupted. "This is outrageous," the prosecutor shouted. David turned back to Marcus. "Son," he said quietly, "are you okay?" Marcus swallowed hard. "Yes," he replied. For the first time since his arrest, that wasn't a lie. But the story wasn't over. Not even close. Because justice, real justice, never comes without a fight, and the system does not forgive being exposed. Judge Whitman raised his gavel again. His hand trembled. "This court will—" Before he could finish, the courtroom doors opened once more. A uniformed officer rushed in, breathless, whispering urgently into the clerk's ear. The clerk's face drained of color. Judge Whitman frowned. "What now?" The clerk whispered back. Whitman's eyes widened. He looked at David Reed, then at Marcus. Then he said the words that made every heart in the room stop. "There has been another development." The courtroom leaned forward as one body. Judge Whitman gripped the edge of the bench, knuckles whitening beneath his robe. "What development?" he asked. The clerk swallowed. "Your Honor, the Department of Corrections has already processed the transfer order. State custody is dispatching now." A ripple of shock moved through the room. The prosecutor's lips curled into something close to satisfaction. Then this discussion is academic. The sentence was lawful at the time it was issued. Marcus's stomach dropped. They're still taking me. David Reed turned sharply. I ordered a hold. The clerk nodded nervously. Yes, sir, but the system shows the order executed at 11:42 a.m. David checked his watch. 41. Someone had moved fast. Too fast. Judge Whitman exhaled through his nose. Mr. Reed, if the transfer is already in motion, then stop it, David said calmly. Whitman hesitated. It's not that simple. David met his gaze. It is. The silence between them stretched, old power against new accountability. Marcus felt his pulse hammering in his ears. The bailiff stepped closer again, uncertainty written across his face. Orders? He asked quietly. Judge Whitman didn't answer right away. That hesitation, just a second too long, told Marcus everything. The system was choosing itself. 2 officers entered from the side door. State uniforms, neutral faces, paperwork in hand. We're here for Marcus Reed, one of them said, the words sliced clean. Marcus's mother stood. You can't, she said, voice shaking. They said, ma'am, the officer replied, not unkindly. We have orders. David stepped between them and his son. I'm invoking federal authority, he said evenly. This transfer is under dispute. The officer hesitated. Sir, we don't have clearance on that. The prosecutor stood. Then follow the order you do have. There it was, the quiet truth Marcus had always known. When race, power, and procedure collide, procedure wins. As the officers moved closer, Marcus's mind splintered. He was 16 again, hands on the hood of a squad car, the metal cold through his shirt. He remembered the way the officer's voice had changed when he ran his name. Another one, the tone had said. He remembered the holding cell, the smell of sweat and bleach. The older man's laugh when Marcus said he was innocent. They don't care. The memory pressed in, heavy and familiar. Marcus felt something inside him bend, but not break. Marcus, David said quietly, not turning around. Look at me. Marcus did. You are not alone, his father said. No matter what happens next. Marcus nodded. That was when the officer reached for his arm. Wait. The voice came from the gallery. An older black woman stood slowly, leaning on a cane. Her eyes were sharp, steady. You're moving awful fast for a case under federal review, she said. Judge Whitman frowned. Ma'am, this is not... I know exactly what this is, she replied. I've been watching courts like this for 40 years. She turned to David. Mr. Attorney General, with your permission. David inclined his head. She faced the judge again. You know what happens when you rush a black boy into a system that already decided his fate? The prosecutor scoffed. This is irrelevant. No, the woman said. It's precedent. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. My name is Eleanor Price, retired federal judge. The room gasped. Judge Whitman's face tightened. I was present when similar transfers were used to avoid oversight. Judge, Price continued. And every time, the court regretted it. She held the paper higher. This is a formal notice of concern. Once entered into the record, any action taken against the defendant becomes subject to immediate injunction. Whitman stared. The clerk looked between them. Your Honor? The judge hesitated again, and this time the room noticed. The prosecutor slammed his hand on the table. This is turning into a circus. David's voice cut through, low and dangerous. No. This is what accountability looks like when it finally walks into the room. He turned to the officers. Stand down. They looked to Judge Whitman. All eyes followed. Whitman closed his eyes briefly. Then, slowly, he nodded. Stand down, he said. The officers stopped. Marcus's legs nearly buckled, but relief was short-lived. The prosecutor straightened his tie. Then I request immediate remand to juvenile detention pending review. David turned. Denied. You don't have that authority. David smiled slightly. Watch me. He produced a document, signed, stamped, unmistakable. Emergency Federal Protective Custody, he said. Effective now. The prosecutor's mouth opened, closed. He sat down hard. Marcus was seated again, hands shaking despite himself. His mother wept openly now, tears of fear and something dangerously close to hope. But Marcus couldn't relax. Not yet, because he could feel it. The anger, the resentment, the eyes that said this isn't over. During a brief recess, Marcus sat alone with his father in a side room. Neither spoke at first. Then Marcus asked the question he'd held for years. Why didn't you tell me? David sighed. Because titles can protect you, or paint a target on your back. Marcus nodded slowly. So, I was a test. No, David said firmly. You were a son, and I trusted the system to do its job. He paused. That was my mistake. Marcus looked down. They already decided who I was. David leaned forward. Then we make them face what they did. Outside, the prosecutor made a call of his own. His voice was low. Urgent. Yes, he said. Now. If we're going to salvage this, it has to be today. He hung up, eyes cold. Across the hall, Judge Whitman stared at his reflection in a darkened window. For the first time in decades, he wasn't sure which side of history he stood on. Back in the courtroom, Judge Whitman reconvened the session. This court acknowledges federal intervention, he said carefully. However, the original verdict remains under review. Marcus felt the word review hang like a blade. Whitman continued. Proceedings will continue tomorrow. Tomorrow. Too much time. Too much room for interference. David rose. Your Honor, with respect? A loud knock echoed from the back doors. Everyone turned. A man in a gray suit entered, flanked by 2 U.S. Marshals. He held up a badge. Internal Affairs, he announced. We're here regarding allegations of prosecutorial misconduct. The prosecutor went pale. What allegations? He demanded. The agent glanced at Marcus, then back at the prosecutor. Suppression of evidence, he said, and racial bias. In charging decisions, the room exploded. Marcus's heart pounded. This was bigger now, much bigger. Judge Whitman's gavel struck hard. Order! The agent stepped forward. Your Honor, we'll need access to all case files, immediately. Whitman nodded stiffly. The prosecutor stared at Marcus. Rage, fear, disbelief colliding in his eyes. Marcus met his gaze, didn't flinch. As the marshals escorted the prosecutor aside, David placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. This is only the beginning, he said softly. Marcus nodded. He understood now. The system wasn't just turning against him, it was turning on itself. And systems don't go quietly. Judge Whitman cleared his throat. Court is adjourned until further notice. The gavel struck. But instead of finality, it sounded like a warning, because somewhere beyond those walls, forces were already moving, and the next move would decide everything. By nightfall, Marcus Reed was no longer just a name on a docket. He was a problem no one could quietly bury. The courthouse lights glowed against the darkening sky as unmarked cars idled at the curb. Phones rang in offices that rarely answered. After 5. Files were pulled. Emails forwarded, decisions made by people who never expected to make them for a 17-year-old black boy from the South Side. Inside a secured federal holding room, not a cell, but not freedom either, Marcus sat at a small metal table, a paper cup of water in front of him, a camera in the corner, a silence that hummed. His father sat across from him. For the first time in years, there were no intermediaries. No short calls, no careful distance, just them. David Reed loosened his tie and set it aside. They're digging now, he said. Hard, Marcus nodded. That bad? That revealing, David replied. Marcus thought about the prosecutor's face when Internal Affairs walked in, the way confidence had drained out of him like air from a punctured tire. Was it always like this? Marcus asked. The system? David didn't answer immediately. When I was younger, he said slowly, I believed the law was a shield, neutral, fair if you followed it closely enough. He met Marcus's eyes. Then I learned it depends on who's holding it. 3 floors above them, in a sealed conference room, men and women who never appeared on the news sat around a polished table. Charging decision was aggressive, one of them said, flipping through a digital file. Felony murder with no direct action. Jury composition? Another asked. 10 white, 2 black. Both alternates dismissed before deliberation. A murmur moved around the table. One woman leaned back. Pattern? The screen changed. Charts appeared. Numbers. Names. Baltimore County. Same prosecutor, same judge, same outcomes. Life sentences, the woman said quietly. All defendants black, all under 20. Silence followed. Not surprise. Recognition. Back downstairs, Marcus stared at his hands. I kept thinking, he said, voice low, that if I did everything right, they'd see me. David's jaw tightened. They saw you. Marcus looked up. They just didn't see your humanity, David continued. They saw a statistic they were comfortable with. The words didn't comfort Marcus. They clarified. The door opened. A federal agent stepped in, tablet in hand. Mr. Reed, she said to David, we've confirmed it. David straightened. Confirmed what? The agent glanced at Marcus, then back. Exculpatory evidence was withheld. Body cam footage from the night of the incident. Another suspect admits firing the weapon. Marcus's breath caught. I told them, he whispered. David closed his eyes briefly. How long did they have it? David asked. Since day one, the agent replied. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't suspense. It was gravity. Across town, the prosecutor sat alone in his office, lights off, phone pressed to his ear. They found it, he said. The footage, a voice on the other end snapped back, sharp and furious. Then deny intent. I can't, the prosecutor replied. It's time-stamped, logged, buried. Another pause. Then, Judge Whitman? The prosecutor hesitated. He signed off on discovery. The voice lowered. Then he goes down with you. The line went dead. The prosecutor stared at the phone, chest tight. For the first time, he understood the cost of winning the wrong way. Judge Whitman sat alone in his chambers, robe draped over the chair, tie loosened. On his desk lay a stack of case files, old ones. He opened one, then another. Patterns emerged that he had once dismissed as coincidence. Context, neighborhoods, names, faces blurred together. Life, he had said. So many times. The knock on his door made him flinch. Come in, he said. The clerk entered, pale. Your Honor, DOJ has requested a formal interview. Whitman nodded slowly. I expected that, he said. As the clerk left, Whitman stared at the bench through the glass wall. For the first time, it didn't feel elevated. It felt exposed. At midnight, Marcus was moved again, this time into a protected federal facility. The doors were quieter. The guards didn't bark orders, no cuffs. Still, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay on a narrow bed staring at the ceiling. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the judge's mouth forming the word, life. He heard the gavel, felt the cold certainty. His father sat in a chair nearby, reading from a thick file. Dad, Marcus said. David looked up. Yeah. What happens if they fight this? David didn't sugarcoat it. They will, Marcus swallowed. And if they win? David closed the file. Then we appeal, and appeal again. That could take years. Yes. Marcus turned his head away. I can't do years. David stood and moved closer. You already did, he said gently. In fear, in silence, in waiting to be believed. Marcus's eyes burned. By morning, the story had leaked, not the full truth, just enough. Headlines danced around it. Federal Review ordered in high-profile murder case. Questions raised over teen life sentence. DOJ declines comment. Sections exploded. Some called Marcus lucky, others called him dangerous. A few asked the question no one wanted to answer. How many didn't have a father who could make that call? At 9:07 a.m., Judge Whitman took the bench again. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows. Cameras waited outside. Marcus sat beside his father. No cuffs, but no illusions either. This court has reviewed new evidence, Judge, Whitman said, voice steady but subdued. Evidence that was not presented at trial. The prosecutor stood, eyes bloodshot, face tight. Your Honor, the state maintains... Sit, Whitman said quietly. The word carried a different weight. Now, Whitman continued, specifically body camera footage indicating the defendant did not discharge a firearm. A murmur rippled through the room. Marcus felt his chest tighten. Hope crept in, dangerous, fragile. Whitman looked directly at Marcus. For the record, he said, this court acknowledges that the defendant was 17 at the time of the offense. Gasps. That sentence alone had been absent before. The prosecutor rose again, desperation cracking through his voice. Even so, presence at the scene is not guilt, Whitman interrupted. Silence slammed down. David's hand rested lightly on Marcus's shoulder. Whitman exhaled. This court is prepared to vacate the sentence, pending formal motion. Pending. Not yet. The word landed like a warning, because before Whitman could continue, the courtroom doors burst open. A man in a tailored suit strode in, confidence sharp as glass. Your Honor, he said loudly. The state objects. Whitman frowned. And you are? The man smiled thinly. Special counsel, appointed this morning. David stiffened. Appointed by whom? He asked. The man turned slowly. By the governor. The courtroom erupted. Marcus's heart sank. Power had answered power. The man continued, eyes locking onto Marcus. This case is no longer just about one defendant. He looked around the room. It's about precedent. David stood. So is justice. The man's smile widened. Then let's see which one survives. Judge Whitman raised his gavel, but his hand shook. Because everyone in that room knew the truth. This wasn't over. Not even close. And the final verdict would decide more than Marcus Reed's future. The courtroom felt different now. Not louder, not quieter, sharper. Every sound. Paper shifting, a throat clearing, the soft click of a pen cut through the air like it mattered. Like history was paying attention. Marcus sat straight, shoulders squared, his father beside him. He could feel the tension in David's stillness. This wasn't anger, it was focus. Judge Whitman stared down at the new man standing near the prosecution table, the governor's special counsel. The man's confidence filled the room the way power always did when it expected obedience. Your Honor, the special counsel said smoothly, the state is asserting its interest. We believe federal overreach is compromising due process. David rose slowly. With respect, he said. Due process was compromised the moment exculpatory evidence was hidden from a 17-year-old defendant. The special counsel smiled thinly. That will be determined. Judge Whitman raised a hand. Enough. The gavel came down, not hard, but final. This court will hear arguments, Whitman said, and this time we will hear all of them. For the next 3 hours, the system put itself on trial. Evidence was projected onto screens. Timelines aligned. Body cam footage played, grainy, unedited, undeniable. The jury from the original trial sat in the gallery now, faces pale as they watched. What they had never been shown. The video showed chaos. Running feet, shouting, a gun in someone else's hand, and Marcus, clearly visible, backing away. "No weapon," David said calmly, pointing. "No discharge, no intent." The prosecutor, former now, suspended pending investigation, sat rigid, eyes fixed on the table. The special counsel tried to regain control. "Presence at a crime scene is not a death sentence," Judge Whitman interrupted. Marcus felt his breath catch. That sentence landed differently when it came from the bench. Then came testimony. A forensic analyst explained trajectory. Federal investigator explained the suppressed evidence. A civil rights expert explained the pattern. Each word peeled away another layer. Until finally, Judge Whitman leaned back in his chair, eyes heavy. "This court," he said slowly, "recognizes that the defendant was tried not only for a crime, but against a presumption. No one moved. No one breathed. Based on race," Whitman continued, "age, and proximity to violence rather than action." Marcus's hands trembled slightly. He clasped them together. David didn't touch him. He didn't need to. Judge Whitman cleared his throat. "In light of new evidence, constitutional violations, and prosecutorial misconduct, this court vacates the conviction." The words hit like thunder. Vacates. Not reviews. Not delays. Vacates. Marcus's vision blurred. His mother cried out from the gallery, an unfiltered sound of relief and release that no courtroom etiquette could contain. Judge Whitman raised the gavel. "Once more, all charges against Marcus Reed are dismissed, effective immediately." Silence. Then, the room exploded. Marcus didn't stand at first. He couldn't. His legs felt unreal, like they belonged to someone else. David turned to him. "It's over," he said quietly. Marcus looked up. "Is it?" David met his gaze. "For you," he said. "Yes." Marcus stood. The sound of chairs scraping back filled the room. Reporters rushed for the doors. Cameras clicked wildly outside, but Marcus didn't look at any of it. He looked at Judge Whitman. The judge met his eyes for the first time. There was no authority there. Just a man who understood the weight of what he had nearly done. "Mr. Reed," Whitman said, voice low, "this court failed you." Marcus said nothing. He didn't need an apology. He had his life back. Outside, the courthouse steps were flooded with light, cameras, microphones. Questions shouted over one another. "Marcus, how does it feel?" "Attorney General Reed, was this favoritism?" "What about other cases?" David raised a hand. "We'll make a statement," he said. "But first," he turned to his son. Marcus stepped forward. The noise softened, not silence. Attention. "I didn't win because of who my father is," Marcus said, voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "I survived because the truth finally mattered," a reporter shouted. "But what about kids who don't get that call?" Marcus nodded. "That's the point." He looked straight into the cameras. "There are a lot of names you'll never hear," he said. "They didn't get this chance. They didn't get this pause." He swallowed. "I almost didn't either." In the weeks that followed, the system shook. The prosecutor resigned. An investigation expanded. 3 past convictions were reopened. Judge Whitman announced early retirement. Not in disgrace. In reckoning. Marcus went home, not to applause, to quiet, to his old room, to his mother's cooking, to sleep without bars in his dreams. One evening, sitting on the front steps as the sun dipped low, Marcus asked his father, "Would you have called if I wasn't innocent?" David didn't hesitate. "I would have called," he said, "but it wouldn't have sounded like this." Marcus nodded. He understood. Power could open doors. Truth had to walk through them. Months later, Marcus enrolled in community college, criminal justice. Not for revenge, for repair. On the first day, a classmate asked him, "Why this major?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Because I've seen what happens when people stop listening," he said. Some nights Marcus still heard the word life, but it no longer sounded like an ending. It sounded like a reminder that silence protects injustice, that systems don't correct themselves, and that sometimes one call doesn't save a life, truth does.